it's taken a few years for me to kind of realize how cool and unique that experience was. Even when I was out there, you know, you sit on the back of a crocodile, you're thinking, this is stupid, this is mental. I think when you've got that sense of wonderment and adventure and you're at uni and you think the possibilities are endless, you think that sort of thing might happen every other year, but it doesn't. And, you know, a week later, I'm playing football with him and his mates, like on an AstroTurf pitch, surrounded by the New York skyline, which is still like a sight that lives with me. I lived near the O2 Academy originally, so it was pretty noisy, but I left my front door and I was like 50 yards from a nightclub, 100 yards from a Caribbean restaurant, 70 yards from a Nando's. I ended up having like 3 beers with Carlos Puyol in the back garden, and I was just like, this is absolutely bizarre. And he was like stood there with his arm around me, like apologizing for his English being bad, and I was like, don't worry about it, Carlos, like that's fine, buddy.
Chris, great to have you on the podcast. Great to catch up more than anything. How are you doing?
I'm absolutely superb, thank you, mate. Like I told you earlier, currently on my day off, ticking off some pro bono work, let's call it. And no, you gave me a month's notice, which is pretty decent of you. So it would have been dreadful form not to be available for today. But I'm looking forward to catching up with you, mate.
Yeah, me too, man. I appreciate you taking the time, especially on your day off. So I'm going to go in with a question I ask everyone to start the podcast off. And that is, how important is travel to you?
Yeah, I'd say increasingly so, because you realise sort of approaching your late 20s when there's certain expectations put on you, either by, you know, a partner you've had for a very long time, 10 years, in my case, over 10 years. So the expectations are pretty reasonable, that you have quite a small window to do what you want, to be a little bit selfish, and sort of traveling is part of that. Not to say you can't do it after, of course. A lot of people make it work for them at any stage of life, but being quite flippant with it, being quite spontaneous, let's say, that window gets a bit smaller. So it is important. And when I was, you know, a little bit younger, I sort of, obsessed with the movies, loved Indiana Jones, loved American films, sort of liked American films from the 70s and 80s as well, weirdly. So I always, you know, found myself thinking about these far off lands, these far off places, and that only kind of fueled the wanting, right? The sense of adventure. So yeah, it is pretty important, but I have, weirdly enough, I think I've become a little bit more scared as I've got older.
Okay.
You know, when I was 15, 16, didn't mind scuba diving in some fucking awful ex-mine shaft in Leicester. Like, used to be fearless, and then I think you lose certain people in your life and you become a little bit more scared. So it maybe gets harder to, like, I'm going to South Africa next year, not to already go off on a tangent.
No, go off.
You know, everyone's already talking about shark cage diving.
Yeah.
My initial instinct was, yes, let's do it. That sounds class. But now I'm just, inevitably, I'm like, the shark's getting in the cage. It's going to be you that happens to.
Yeah.
So little things like that, I maybe have more kind of twisted, darker thoughts, which are harder to wrestle with, let's say. But no, important, mate.
No, I think that happens when you're a kid. You're just not scared of anything, are you? So to take it all the way back to that childhood, what was travel like for you as a child? Did you go away on many trips abroad?
Not loads. My dad had a strong affinity with France, so we'd often find ourselves in France. I suppose the strongest childhood memories regarding travel was maybe on the English coast. We went on a couple of holidays to see my cousin in Almeria, the southern tip of Spain, pretty much, you know, North Africa. A time when it was really undeveloped. You know, I don't think the football club was in the top 3 divisions, let's say, and it was just like quite rural. So I have some quite strong memories with Almeria as well. I used to own a bar, so, you know, you'd be introduced to all the regulars. It was 60 meters from the sea. The sea was pretty warm and like pretty volatile as well, which is quite, you know, fun to play in before, you know, you're old enough to learn about things like riptides, because riptides will fucking kill you, Alex.
Yeah.
So yeah, like Almeria, France, but we used to go to Cromer quite a lot. I think it's in Hunstanton.
Yeah.
And when I was younger, maybe I was just, you know, quite a low maintenance child. Like, I have stronger memories of that than something like Disneyland Paris, because it's like, you know, the piers, miserable English weather, being in a caravan's quite novel, I suppose, when you're a kid. And there's like a little World War II ex-memorabilia shop there. I accidentally bought I bought a hat, not accidentally, but didn't realize it was from the fascist side
Oh,
of
right.
the of that particular war, and wore it, proudly as a 10-year-old marching through Chrome of the streets of Hunstanton, not realizing I was wearing an ex-German officer's hat. So
Right.
some pretty funny memories there. But I don't know. I just maybe associated that with getting away, and it just feeling like really different.
Yeah, so I wanted to move on to a stage in your life which I think came chronologically before we talk about New York, and that's coaching football in Ghana. Is that correct?
That is correct, mate. Yeah, way before New York.
We'll go chronological then. So,
Nice.
for a guy that's, you say yourself, spent holidays in England, been to Almeria, how did the idea of going to Ghana to coach football come about?
Really randomly, and it's one of those things where if I hadn't gone to university, it's definitely not something I would have pursued, or would have maybe just been given the opportunity. Maybe pursued's the wrong word. A guy, an ex-student from Nottingham, I think he'd been graduated 4 or 5 years by the time he put this event on, let's say, and it coincided with my second year, and it was about living with a family in Ghana for 2-3 months. Wow. Doing a form of volunteering of your choice, so you could kind of make the experience to what you wanted to do. And me and my roommate Sean, were just like, yeah, we'll keep it simple. We'll coach football. By the way, they did not need our minimal footballing expertise. They were absolutely outstanding when we got out there. Like, really innovative, really well drilled. Obviously, Ghana is a football nation that is steeped, in great pedigree, great footballing pedigree. So it was more of I suppose, a novelty for the kids we were coaching when we were out there, right? Because in some of the cities, like Kumasi, we went to, some of the other names escape me, that more smaller remote villages we tended to be in the north. They hadn't seen, these young kids hadn't seen a white person before. So like, we were happy to be that novelty for them. But yeah, it just came about, literally notice board stuff, looked cool. Went to a few meetings. The people that went there that were also interested in it, pretty interesting characters themselves. And it turned out to be the only year they did it at the University of Nottingham. Yeah, like, I think they had ambitions to make it a yearly thing. But it turned out to be the only year. And it's taken a few years for me to kind of realize how cool and unique that experience was. Even when I was out there, you sit on the back of a crocodile, you're thinking, this is stupid. This is mental. It's not something I think when you've got that sense of wonderment and adventure and you're at uni and you think the possibilities are endless, you think that sort of thing might happen every other year, but it doesn't. So yeah, it was great, man. Like, I'd recommend it to anyone. The people we live with, unbelievable. So just generous. And the guy was called Mr. Hattie, real eccentric, elaborate dress sense, had a peacock, had an antelope. Wow. The mother there, it was called Moda, which I think is Ghanaian for mother. We didn't realize we were calling her mother at the time, but it just referred to as Moda. He had 3 or 4 kids, just all really welcoming, and a week in, you just find yourself sat around the TV watching like Nigerian X Factor, like Amazing. it's nothing. And it was great, man. It was really good.
To go into a bit more detail on that, you're there for 3 months, your living conditions, you're living with a family then. So where were you sleeping at night? Was it a real culture shock for you?
Yeah, but it's something you arrive and, you feel uncomfortable and you are filled with doubt, because we went to Accra, which is the capital, and then we got a bus all the way up north to where we were staying. And that in itself, like, the capital is not a massive culture shock. Obviously there's like there's shanties and there is poverty that you don't witness in the UK, but there's still like the basic amenities, or not even basic in most cases. But then that bus journey takes you into like the wilderness, cultural wilderness, let's say. And you leave everything and you're just diving head on into something you've never encountered before. And there was a bit of trepidation, particularly when you stop overnight in not a hotel, I don't even know how to describe it, just a room, just a white room with beds where the mat, there's cockroaches pinging about. And you think, what, I've jumped into the deep end here, the proverbial deep end, and I've got nowhere to go. So you kind of have no other option but to suck it up. But then the more you offload that tension and open your, receptors to other things, like the easier it gets. And fundamentally, I would like to think we stayed with the best host. Mr. Hattie was in my eyes, the most generous, caring man in the whole continent at that point. But he would do little things to make you feel at home. Little fried egg sandwiches in the morning with his own little twist on it, like shaven green peppers in the white, nice. Which I'd never seen before. There was a little cheese out there called wagashi that was deep fried in the street, sort of a bit like halloumi, which would kind of fetch on the way home we'd learn to love. There was a stall opposite us where the woman who we used to buy a Coke off every day, and you take the bottles back, right? Because if they return the bottles to the factory, they'd get money for that. Yeah. Eventually we just arrived at a deal where she'd just drop 6 Cokes off at our house every morning. Like, she'd send one of the kids over, and then we'd send them back with the money. Then we'd bring the bottles back, and you build a little relationship there. Obviously the English is pretty good. Into historical circumstances in a lot of instances. So, you're trying to take 20, 30 kids for a football session, and lo and behold, it's 12 o'clock, it's blazing sun smashing down on you midday. You start to feel faint, and you being Johnny Foreigner has to go and sit under a tree while these kids just do what they want with a football.
So there's so many positives from that trip. It sounds like a great experience, but obviously going from England to Ghana, you're going to see poverty, which you've said you've not seen before. And it's probably going to be a bit of an eye-opening experience. Did you learn anything from that which you've taken on to your life going forward?
Yeah, definitely. My dad, when I was younger, used to say, like, this house is a castle and you just don't appreciate it. And I think it's then that you kind of, you hear at moments like that, you hear that voice, my dad's voice saying that, and it all kind of clicks into place. And it is, you have a heightened appreciation for what you've got. And that might be a little bit transient. It might, come and go. But like most well-traveled people will say, and it does ring very true, the poorest people are generally the people who go out of their way to do the most for you in that instance. That's what I found. Maybe not to... You subconsciously have a bias. You subconsciously judge people by the immediate physical surroundings. Like, I don't think we can help it. It's a form of survival, right? But you learn to appreciate, I guess, the nuance a little bit more when you stay there, when you appreciate, these people are sometimes just victims of circumstance. And the only thing that's really separating you is the fact you were fortunate enough to be born in a more affluent, country, and you kind of fundamentally have the same principles. Where we were staying, it was a very mixed community as well. There was Muslims, Christians, the mosques would go off at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I wouldn't always appreciate that. I have my pillow over the top of my head thinking I've got a coach, like a whole village in about 2 hours. And I've not even thought of, a training regime, never mind being woken up at 4 o'clock. But you just, I think it takes, 2 or 3 weeks to really become a porous and just kind of soak in your surroundings. But yeah, I think just a heightened appreciation for how mostly normal people are, how mostly normal most people are.
Amazing. And to move on from one massive life experience to another involving travel, you studied in New York, and that just seems incredible to me. I wondered if you could give the listeners some insight into what it was you studied, and also why New York.
Yeah, less incredible when you consider the circumstances. Like, I was working in Leicester for a couple of years at an advertising agency. I'd kind of had enough even before my dad passed away. And that was what prompted me to say, listen, my grandma's left me X amount of money. Like, I'm not going to use it for a deposit. Like, was earmarked for me in 5-10 years time. I'm just going to use it now to do something for myself that I think will probably grow me professionally and personally, and will hopefully, benefit me in the long run. So I used my grandma's money to attend a 9-week filmmaking course at the New York Film Academy, which, unlike traditional schools, is like, we have these terms. You can effectively buy a term.
Yeah.
you can do it annually. Doing it annually is very expensive. I'd love to have gone there for a year, but it's probably upwards of like 30 grand. So not something on my radar. Yeah, exactly. So I was like, I'll go and do a term. I'll go to the 9-week filmmaking course. I'll stay out there for, a week before, maybe a week and a bit after. And yeah, it was absolutely class. It was like everything I wanted it to be and more, but it could have easily gone the other way. It could have been a much more difficult trip. I'd like to think I'd have made the most of it regardless, but I just so happened to, pick an Airbnb where there was another student at the film school there, Toby from Switzerland. Yeah, he'd been there for some months already, so sort of knew the ropes. Really nice guy. Still speak to him now. I spoke to him, last week actually. He's just had a daughter.
Amazing.
So making friends for life there, and walking into this eccentric sort of setup owned by this woman called Leah. She referred to the house as the tree house on Airbnb. So I knew I was going into bohemian surroundings, let's say. And just there was a Brazilian saxophonist called Josue, asleep on the sofa. Didn't know, who he was, obviously, when I walked in. Got the lowdown in the morning from Toby that this is a guy that plays the local jaunts, bars, dive bars and whatever, and then uses Leah's place to crash every now and then. And a week later, I'm playing football with him and his mates, like on an AstroTurf pitch, surrounded by the New York skyline, which is still like a sight that lives with me. And yeah, this portly Brazilian saxophonist teaching me an absolute lesson at football. I thought, looking at his somatotype, looking at his chubby little belly, thought I'm gonna have a good game here. Like his friends, quite similar, a little bit older, but now just seasoned veterans. Most of them were South American and just sending me for hot dogs on the regular. But yeah, I couldn't recommend the filmmaking course highly enough. And what, just to tap into the motive a little bit more, wasn't only owing to grief, it was also a little bit of regret at not doing a more practical filmmaking course at university. So I picked the university over the course when I went to university. And the University of Nottingham was in the top 10 in the UK. I've been accepted and didn't read all that much into the course, like the campus, liked the university, the idea it was only an hour and a half away in the car from home, that is, and I just went for it. And when I finally got to university and I was doing a lot of theory, a lot of essay writing, I wasn't motivated. I've recently revisited some of the work I did and it was piss poor. And it was just because it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So that was kind of making amends for that, I guess, a couple of years later as well.
Brilliant. And we've had so many people say that New York is their favorite city. So to have someone on who's lived there is incredible. Do you feel like you made the most of living in the city, which many people describe as the best city in the world? Did you go out on many nights out? Did you go to all the amazing restaurants and see all the tourist attractions?
Well, yes and no. I actually didn't do many of the tourist attractions because I was in school 6 days a week. So it was a little bit inhibiting, I guess, from that sense. And it cost a lot of money. So I wasn't doing loads while I was out there, as in, Rockefeller Center, and we did Ground Zero and stuff, but you were doing little things that you just wouldn't have done otherwise because you were with a group of classmates or because you were with housemates. Like we had, a big Italian bloke called Frank come over and made us, the best meatballs I've ever had. And
amazing.
And his advice was just like, I asked him, give me one good cooking tip. And he just said, leave it in a tomato sauce for as long as is humanly possible before you serve it. So that's one thing that will stick with me as well. But as part of the course, we had to make 5 little films and you had to, because you're in a team of 5 and you had to produce one, direct one, write one. So you touched all the components of filmmaking, right? Amazing. So it was the idea is to give you a well-rounded experience. And that's quite intense to do in, for 3 or 4 weeks. That wasn't the entirety of the course. So you feel like you're maybe not getting to see the sights, but at the same time, I'm also at a veterans home in Harlem, interviewing some guy, and it's just not an experience you get being a tourist or going to Queens or where else? Brooklyn, like renting a little apartment in Brooklyn to shoot in Brooklyn. And it was all geared towards film. Like I wasn't really asked about the travel aspects because I was here to learn what I wanted to be my craft, right? But you just do it in the process, and maybe you realize that a little bit later. But yeah, having someone like being taken to a little Brazilian dive bar where they have like what is the cocktail? It's cachaça is the main ingredient, right? I'm talking about the one. This sometimes happens to me. I'm going insane. It's lime, it's sugar. I think it's cachaça and maybe something else. But just having them for the first time, like properly for the first time, and stuff like that is not things you tend to forget. I would love to go back, obviously, and do some more touristy things. But I think I would. Yeah, I'd like to stay for another like elongated amount of time.
Yeah,
because it's quite. I think it's insurmountable in like a week or a long weekend.
Completely agree. It sounds to me like you saw the real New York as well. So maybe you didn't do the tourist attractions, but you saw things of New York which tourists just simply wouldn't be able to do.
And that was only owing to other people's generosity, right? Which is, I think, one consistent theme that probably goes through most. I wouldn't even consider myself that well traveled at this point. You meet people who are truly well traveled. I think they rely on the generosity and spirit of others to enhance their experience, right? So you are you do put yourself in the hands of other people, and if you do so willingly, I think more often than not, you will stand to benefit from it. Obviously, there's horror stories and whatnot, but they only happen at a fraction of the time, it would seem. So I just say trust the natives to do you a solid more often than not.
Lovely. And I want to move on now to Football Daily, because it's where most people will know you from. But the origin stories to you joining Football Daily are quite interesting. I've heard you speak about staying on a mate's floor when you first arrived in London. I wondered if you could give us some insight into that first experience of living in London, because obviously growing up in Leicester, the contrast between Leicester and London must have been vast for you. Yeah.
I mean, London was straight after New York. So London's the only English city that compares, right? So it wasn't a huge transition, I guess, from what I'd just been through. And Leicester's, small but busy and industrious. But I had no money. I saw this job on production base. I didn't want to do it for long. The plan was not to be here for 5 years. I'd be talking to you today, Alex. It was get 3 to 6 months worth of pay, see where you are after that, and take things as they are. So no grand long-term plan that sort of germinated into Football Daily. Sleeping on my friend's floor, not fun. Very kind of him and his girlfriend to put me up for 5 months. I did tell them it was 1 to 2 months, but got pretty comfortable there. It was intense, I guess, to start off with. Particularly, I think they're moving out into my own flat on spare room, and there being no real compelling reason to come home, which leads, because my girlfriend was still living in Leicester, it fuels an unhealthy working pattern, which I suppose helped us make good on Football Daily, right? It was fueled by an unhealthy kind of obsession to reach 1 million subscribers or to reach 1.5. It's not quite as intense as it used to be now, thank God. But I think that definitely helped. The fact that I was going home to see my girlfriend at the weekend, or every other weekend, but from 7 till 10, a.m. till 10 p.m. every day. It was like, this is my opportunity to make this work. So I have like a small time in which to do it, but long hours. So that definitely helped. Oh, I'm not sure I'd recommend that to anyone.
No, yeah. I remember seeing you guys working your absolute bollocks off, like grafting into the evening. Maybe we'd come to visit you guys in your office. It'd be like 8 p.m. and all you boys are still in, just editing and grafting away. One of the hardest working groups of people I know.
Oh, thanks, mate. Appreciate that. But you're looking at videos of me, like in those first 2 years, and just looking ill, looking like we worked long hours, sallow eyes, shit haircuts. I mean, it was still an independent before Sky bought us, so shit pay as well. Like we started on 22 grand, which does not get you very far in London whatsoever, particularly when you've just spent all of your fucking money in New York. So there was that. But I guess, it paved the way for positive things. If it hadn't, and you asked me, was it worth it? Obviously, that's difficult to gauge. I'm just fortunate enough that it did go our way. So yeah, the start was, it was rough, but I think most small independent companies have a story like that, right?
Absolutely. And of course, London, like New York, is one of the greatest cities in the world.
Big time.
I think, yeah, everyone would agree that. What would you say is your favorite thing about living in London?
It's a good question. It's a very good question, because there's a lot of things. I don't know whether this is indicative of like the cynic that I've become, but the things you don't like about London spring to mind quicker, which is like the rent, the commuting, but I just the variety. Like you don't get the variety anywhere else. And contrary to, Twitter and the news, it does just coexist most of the time absolutely perfectly. I remember telling my mum that I was going to live in Brixton, and she was absolutely mortified because the version of Brixton she was imagining me living in was a volatile one from the 80s, where riots happened. I don't know if they happen regularly, but when they did, they were big, weren't they? And I didn't have any preconceptions, and just went down there, and I've not, still live in the area 5 years later and absolutely love it. And Leicester had a huge Indian population, and it's got a big, it's a fairly big Polish population, Somalian population, but never like a Caribbean one. So that was a fairly new to me and interesting to learn, and just to be immersed in, the market culture of Brixton and the culinary delights down here, mate. Like you can leave your front door, and I lived near the O2 Academy originally, so it was pretty noisy. But I left my front door, and I was like 50 yards from a nightclub, 100 yards from a Caribbean restaurant, 70 yards from a Nando's. Everything. I think that's a good sort of distillation of London. You go from going to the Horse and Trumpet in Leicester, one of your mates picks you up, it's the nearest pub, it's 20 minutes away, there's nothing much else to do. You go from that to having everything at your fingertips, or everything being half an hour away, and it does take you a while to be in a position to take advantage of that, unless you've got rich parents, etc. So you kind of have to, you're like looking through the glass, so to speak, to start off with, like, oh, look at those cocktails, they look nice. At £12 a cocktail, I will not be buying, one of them until I have been promoted 3 times. So you kind of have to grit your teeth and bear it. But I imagine it's an even harder city to like live in or come up in. There is advantages from, I think from, coming from Leicester to London. It's I love the intensity and the variety, mate. Unrivaled.
Absolutely. And of course, travel has played a big role in your working career as well. So with Football Daily, you've been fortunate enough to travel to so many different locations. And before this, I just made a list of all the different places you've been. So interviewed Oblak and Griezmann in Madrid, Puyol and Del Piero in Bali, Thomas Müller in Munich, and interviewed Virat Kohli in Goa. I wanted to ask you, is there anyone I've missed, firstly, because that's an incredible list?
I think Oblak and Griezmann wasn't an interview, by the way, because he didn't speak English. So I got like a photo with him, and then they were like, is there anything else? They were like, is there anything else you want to do? And we were like, no. actually, no, we said, we actually got him to do a swipe up thing on Instagram.
Okay, nice.
And he was absolutely delighted that we weren't doing an interview with him, like so much so that he was like rubbing my shoulders on the way out, patting me out. And I was just like, because it was just like a little break in his schedule. There's nothing we could do for him. I wish I could speak fluent French, but I can't. There's been several less glamorous ones as well.
Yes,
interviews in Bournemouth, getting off at Bournemouth train station, like with a cameraman thinking, holding a tripod and a bag, like, where the fuck do we go now? And Wolverhampton. But yeah, you're right. Very, very fortunate. And again, when you're doing those interviews, sometimes like I regret how stressed I was doing them, right? Because you're so fixated on getting the content in the bag, getting it saved to a hard drive, multiple hard drives, making sure it's in focus, making sure the sound's gone fine, making sure you've got the brand messaging in, making sure you're not made a tit of yourself. Like the worst one we did was in Marseille with Balotelli. Like we were promised 5-10 minutes of Balotelli, and he just didn't know. And they were just said, can you do it now? And we just sat there with the equipment, like, what do you mean, can we do it now? And it was the worst conditions to shoot an interview in. But we also did Hegerberg, the Ballon d'Or winner, the female Ballon d'Or winner, and she was lovely, man. She was such a nice woman. That kind of made up for the Balotelli fiasco. But also a lot of those opportunities we had to carve out for ourselves, and they are quite bizarre how we got to them. Like Pat had a friend that worked at Allianz. Allianz had like 10 minutes with Thomas Muller, and we got half of that time. And it was, so bizarre how we got there. But each of them little trips are it feels like kind of recognition or justification for, all the hard work you put in, because they are the cool little milestones you remember for sure.
Absolutely. Is traveling with work something that you enjoy?
I wish I enjoyed it more. Like it was like, so like I said previously, a little bit anal, obviously like to be in control, like to be organized, and traveling to shoot something doesn't necessarily facilitate that. I mean, when we went out to Indonesia as well with work to do the whole Heineken thing, and the whole time I think Heineken also own, San Miguel, right? Yes. They own San Miguel, and I knew that San Miguel were looking for a Europa League partner while we were out there. So obviously I spend most of my time trying to convince the guys that they should opt for Football Daily as part of their Europa League partnership with San Miguel. I think it ultimately ended up going with Copa 90, classic. But but instead of kind of just taking in my surroundings, I was in work mode. And you just think, if you want more of this, this is how I feel like I've got to be, which isn't necessary. There's a little bit of truth in that, but it's not the whole truth. So it's not totally relaxing. And sometimes it is a matter of airport, hotel, sleep, interview, morning, fly back. Like with John Oblak, that's his brother, Jan Oblak. That was pretty much it, although we did sneak in a nice little meal after the interview. But I will say the sense of relief after you've got everything that you need to get is like unparalleled. When both camera angles look fresh, you're not overly exposed, the sound is crisp, everyone's in focus, you've delivered a flawless brand plug at the start. You actually start, they're the things that reaffirm you wanting to be a presenter or interviewer or content creator. That's where you kind of sometimes maybe take note of the progression.
Nice. And you say you don't get much downtime on these trips, something I've experienced as well, so I know that to be only too true. But do you have any takeaways from trips that you've been on which have been things you've enjoyed in your downtime?
I mean, Indonesia was cool, man. Like, we landed in Jakarta, we went to Surabaya.
Okay, yeah.
And I suppose like learning about Thai football culture on those little trips or stopping and speaking to people was cool. And, tasting the street food and going to see landmarks. I think obviously it also gives you an appreciation for how global the Premier League is as a product as well.
Yeah.
We're walking around Surabaya and seeing just Manchester United, Chelsea, Liverpool shirts. It does give you a heightened sense of how important it is, how big it is on a global scale. And these people are just football, essentially. A lot of them are football fans just like yourself, who give it far, too much thought in their day-to-day lives, just like you. So I think in those little moments in between, those little moments of reprieve are great, but it'd be quite easy just to kind of use that to relax instead of explore. So I would say, if you get the opportunity to do something on a work trip, where the easy option is, no, I'm going to stay in, have a meal at the hotel because I'm tired, I don't want to go and do this. For example, in Indonesia, they said, do you want to go to the wrap party at the end with Heineken? And I ended up having like 3 beers with Carlos Puyol in the back garden. I know, and I was just like, this is absolutely bizarre. And he was like, stood there with his arm around me, like apologizing for his English being bad. And I was like, don't worry about it, Carlos. Like that's fine, buddy. And they are kind of like lucid moments. Yeah. You're like, is this real? But yeah, I just say classic kind of say yes to everything approach.
Perfect, man. Great attitude. And of course, we've listed off some massive names there and massive life experiences, massive things that you've done through work. Do you have, and can you pinpoint a highlight of your entire career?
Whoa. I'd say the Goa thing was very satisfying on a number of fronts, right? Because it was the first time we'd really convinced our then eccentric CEO to part with some money to actually to do something we wanted to do. We had an in at the football club through someone else on the commercial team. And I'd always been fascinated with India. Like, it was on my bucket list, let's say, at the top of my bucket list. So I had a vested interest to kind of really get it over the line. And we ended up only, flying 11 hours to go somewhere for 3 days is a trip in itself. Yes. So I would love to have gone out there for longer. And Goa's actually, it's still retains a lot of its, imprints from like colonialism. So there's a Portuguese colony for a long, long time. Strong elements of Catholicism still out there. You see it in the architecture. You see it in various other walks of life. So it's kind of like India light, because there's a Western hint about it. And there's also a large Russian population out there as well. Bizarrely, I couldn't tell you why. So I didn't feel like I didn't feel like I was there for long enough, and two, it didn't feel like true India. But it was still a great introduction. Didn't really realize how big Virat Kohli was while we were interviewing Matt out there. Got to say that was like a moment of serendipity. Like, he goes like 2 or 3 times a season, and we just happened to be there at the same time as him. And they were like, and they said, "Yeah, do you want to interview him?" And we were like, "Sure." Cool. If again, one of those things where it's going to require an hour, 2 hours more prep than we had factored in, and it might have been a little bit of a ball ache doing that on the go. But we're like, yes, it's going to add to the video. We don't really know what the vlog is going to be about at this point, how it's going to take shape. So we might as well have more footage than we need. And then obviously Virat Kohli is like their version of David Beckham, right, over there in the cricket world. I mean, if not on a larger scale, because there's billions of people who kind of revere him. So that was really cool, a really cool chance encounter. And I would say it was satisfying doing, after feeling like you'd given so much of your own time or more time than you contractually obliged to this project, and maybe not, feeling a little bit shortchanged at the start, financially speaking, because you're independent and you have that part and parcel. It was nice to get something sanctioned because I wanted it, but obviously we still had to justify it. But it was nice to tie that in with a sound enough business reason to go out there and do it. So that was kind of like claiming one for me and one for the team. So that was a good moment.
Fantastic, mate. I want to move on now to the more staple questions from the show and ask you if you could pinpoint your favorite city in the entire world.
Woof. Favorite city? That is such a good question, isn't it? And you think I'd be better prepared. I mean, Rome springs to mind straight away, because I don't think there's many places like Rome. I'm a big fan of history. Like, I used to be, did it at A-level. I watched, the World War II in color documentaries on Netflix. I've just started watching one on the Roman Empire. Maybe that's why it's kind of its way into my subconscious. Yeah. But Rome, there just isn't many places like that where you're walking down every street and everything feels ancient.
Absolutely.
And that's pretty cool. And when I last went there, Celtic beat Lazio 2-1 at the Olimpico, which again might have something to do with it. We were sat with the Lazio fans, and the security guard lets all of my friends through. I roped in 3 mates to go with me. He stops me and he says, "You're English, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Are you a Celtic fan?" And I was like, of all the people, like, I actually asking the one person who's a Celtic fan, are they a Celtic fan in the group? And I was like, "What, can you smell it on me or something? What's this all about?" And I said, "No, I'm actually studying here, and I just came to sample the atmosphere." And as such, he let me in. We were stopped a few times by the Lazio fans to say, like, "Oh, where are you guys from?" And when you say London and Leicester, in a London and Leicester accent, it's not too hard to convince people otherwise. So, I mean, I'm sure if I'd said I'm from London in a thick Glaswegian accent, it might have been a problem. I think 2 people have been stabbed in the arse with like shivs that morning, which is a odd pastime of Lazio ultras. So I didn't really fancy getting stabbed in the arse.
I don't blame you, mate.
So I was pretty delighted to get the win and to get out of there. And then we found this little restaurant on the way back, which we were like, all right, let's just check the Google reviews for this place, because it looks like shanty. It's a tarpaulin just nailed to the side of the house, basically. And it was like 4.8 on Google reviews from 5,000 reviews. And we were sat there saying to ourselves, have we just stumbled across a past the gold mine and it was unbelievable. So everything about that trip sort of, came together. Yeah, I think Rome's probably a good candidate for that.
Brilliant. Do you like doing city breaks? Is it something which you try and do regularly?
Yeah, but I think that shouldn't be your main. This is going to sound a bit bougie now, isn't it? I don't think that should be your main holiday. If you need
I agree.
If you need to relax, a city break's probably not the one, because you come back feeling knackered, don't you? And rightly so. Like if you've done it right, you should be knackered. But I do love them, little bursts here and there. I much prefer that than a week lying on a sunbed in Greece.
Awesome. So Rome's your favorite city. What about a favorite country?
I do like the Spanish culture.
Yeah.
The siestas and tapas and ordering a beer and getting 8 small things to eat.
Oh, amazing.
In the south, along with that. I think it's only in the south that they still do that.
Yeah.
Fiscally, it doesn't really make sense. I guess they might not do it now with COVID and that. But yeah, being in the south and there's still loads of that culture is pretty prominent. It is cool. So Spain's definitely up there. I need to have a think. Favorite country. I also am much more amenable to the French than a lot of British people. Like,
okay,
I don't understand the general problem with them. Or in the north, yeah, maybe a little bit more standoffish. In the south, a bit more wily, a bit more vibrant. Like Marseille was a pretty cool city. A little bit edgy as well.
Yeah.
It's impossible to say. Like the States as well. It's effectively 50 small countries.
Yeah, it really is.
I'm going to go for Spanish culture as a knee-jerk sort of reaction to that question. Yeah.
Nice. Do you have any stories from times in Spain which you could relive?
Fantastic trip to Barcelona. That was a gift from my girlfriend, and a little stadium tour of Barcelona.
Lovely.
I remember at the time, I think it was after like 1 or 2 years, this probably ties in with your previous point, well, working at Football Daily, and I went there and it was so jarring just stopping working in that manner altogether for like 4 or 5 days, that I actually found myself out there really anxious, really like fidgety, didn't adjust to being on holiday from being at work. And it, not that it tainted the trip, but I'd like to go back because I felt on edge. I remember being on edge that trip, the first real trip after kind of making a good fist of it with Football Daily. But yeah, I'd say going back to the sort of Almeria stuff, the festival stuff. I really want to go to Madrid as well.
Great city.
I've been Madrid and more of the south where it's like 50 degrees and jet that clean into my veins, mate.
Great country, and I think it's the first time anyone said Spain as well, so that's nice. Brand new answer.
Nice.
So you've obviously lived in the US. Would you say lived? Would you say you lived there?
So what was it? 12 in total.
12 weeks.
So I wouldn't know. It was an extended stay. I was very much a visitor.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you've gone away for an extended period of time, and obviously you've been drawn away there by the film school. Have you ever wanted to live abroad? Has that ever been something which has been on your radar?
So yeah, originally university, my original degree was film with Chinese studies with a year with a view to doing a year in China.
Wow.
And then I was absolutely tragic at Mandarin because I was playing 8 hours of FIFA a day and practicing Mandarin for about 37 minutes before I gave up with it. Like one small flick of the wrist changes a symbol from mum to horse, and I just the intricacy was just doing my head in.
Why Mandarin?
It goes back to this kind of like sense of adventure. And when I was looking at the courses, I just thought, how out there? And that appealed to me. And it felt like that would be, if I could sort of master or the basics of the language, that puts you in such good stead career-wise. Because it's such it's still quite unique to be able to speak Mandarin in Europe, I guess, comparatively speaking. And I wasn't ready or disciplined for how hard it was. It was a complete and utter failure. And I dropped it. Like I dropped that bit of my degree just to go straight film after the first year, after my soft fail in Mandarin.
So have you ever been to China?
No. It's
something on your bucket list?
Maybe it scarred me for life. I'd like to. So a close friend of mine is moving to Hong Kong. I know that's not strictly China, but I anticipate going to Hong Kong next year. to see him. So that would be quite nice to get that one in the bag.
Awesome. And food, obviously, a massive part of why people travel, massive part of the cultures in different countries too. Would you consider yourself a foodie?
Mate, do you watch Somebody Feed Phil?
No,
on
I've
Netflix?
Seen it on Netflix advertised.
Mate, you need to get on it. It's so good. It is so good. Obviously, this like nervous, like elderly Jewish man, and at first, as such, you think maybe this is a show for like my parents.
Yeah.
But it's actually class. It's so good. Like me and Lauren absolutely inhaled it. Awesome. And as such, I think it's made me want to tie in food a little bit more with travel.
Awesome.
Before, it wasn't really a motivation. You know, it was I'm open to trying the native delicacies, but didn't really, like you just said, for a lot of people that is a main driver. For me, it wasn't, wasn't really a big deal. I got to say, when I went to Lisbon, the food there was incredible.
Oh, so good, isn't it?
Because it's so fresh. And you're like, do I want like sardines? Like sardines are a bit like, I've had them in a cone in Chroma. They're gnarly. I don't want them. Why does this guy keep offering them to me, saying they're the best thing on the menu? You have them and you're like, like I've never tasted like sardines like that before. So yeah, Lisbon, incredible. Obviously the Time Out food hall there.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, class. Obviously the natters. Did you have the natters while you were out there?
Yep, absolutely.
Yes,
has to be
unreal.
done.
Just like 4 in one go.
Yeah,
just decadence, mate. Pure gluttony. Put about 6 like pounds on while I'm out there. Pounds? Do English people say pounds?
I reckon we can go pounds.
I've been watching too much Somebody Feed Phil. Yeah, and Reykjavik. Actually, have you been to Iceland? Have you been to Reykjavik?
No, I've never been to Iceland. Never. I seem to be kind of drawn to the warmer countries. I kind of do not deal well with being cold. So as a result, I've actually never been to Scandinavia. So that's definitely somewhere I need to go. I feel like, especially doing this podcast as well, people kind of come on with the expectation that I've been everywhere, and there's very many gaps in my list of places to go. So, would you recommend Reykjavik?
Got those ambitions though? Yeah, Reykjavik it's expensive. So you have to kind of bit more pre-planning to make sure you're not getting your pants absolutely pulled down when you get there. Like where we were staying was like half an hour from the airport. And one taxi wanted to charge me £90 to take me there. And I was like, I will fucking walk, mate, before I pay you £90. So and like 2 coach tickets there were like £36. So, little things like that. There are little traps to avoid, because it is an expensive country, because it can afford to be, right? The people, little, not cold, but just like friendly. Yeah, I'd say like hospitable, but things felt a little bit more clinical, like in Spain or Italy, it can feel like a little bit of a mesh of things, or, your food can come late, but you don't mind because you've had 4 beers. Like the service is on point there. The food is on point. It's so fresh. Everything just like the air is crisp. The water's cold. Like it's one of those ones where if you want a total gear change, it's really nice. It was the same in Copenhagen, actually. Copenhagen, the food was fucking spot on, man.
So you've obviously spoken about Lisbon, Reykjavik, and now Copenhagen. Where would you say is the best place for food that you've ever been?
I'm going to go Copenhagen,
Okay.
Late entry. Late entry.
What kind of foods?
It's just, I'm not a foodie, so I couldn't tell you what like clashes of cuisine they were or anything. But I think there's a bit of a movement out there now, particularly around like brunches, really elaborate brunches, and we've got some good recommendations. I will say that, but you go to one of these brunches, and then there's a big like craft brewery movement out there as well now, and you're around the corner from a big tap house, and you can sort of see out the whole day, eating and drinking.
Amazing.
And they're within 50 yards of one another. So the public transport's really good in Copenhagen as well. And I just remember the best scrambled eggs I've ever had. And I'm a huge egg fiend, even though apparently I'm allergic to them. Hence eggs. Doesn't matter. I'm like Patrick Severn, mate. I'm allergic to them. I'll continue to eat them. The best scrambled egg I've ever had, Copenhagen. Just like,
what's so special about them?
Fluffy. Just magical, because it's so they're easy to do hard, but hard to elevate, right? Did I say they're easy to mess up, sorry, and hard to elevate, but this place so dainty, and the combination of foods was just unreal. It's a little bit more like scientific, I suppose.
Yeah. I get that.
Like, yeah, it's a little bit like, what's, like bloody Heston. Is there like food deity or something? Like they've taken all their nods from him. Yeah.
So is there a holiday or place or trip that means the most to you?
Another good question. Another really good question. Means the most, because that's not the best, is it?
No.
I think probably South Africa last year with my closest friends. So there was seven of us, and the main reason we went out there is because it tied in with one of my mates' mum's 50th, and she wasn't very well, and it's sort of going to be her last birthday, and sort of being introduced to their family, their close friends was really nice. Some touching moments. I don't speak to them still, but I'm like, they're going back then next year to get married, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some of them. Particularly this old guy called Mark, fought in the Boer Wars. Some of his political views, not so great, but still a great drinking buddy, which I feel like that could be said about a lot of South African people, to be perfectly honest. Completely generalizing there, but that was like a holiday that I was able to save for, plan for, take quite comfortably, knowing that work was going to be okay in the background, taken care of. We've got a good team who know what they're doing, and it was like a really relaxed trip. Nice pace. Went on safari for the first time, and there was nothing. Maybe like using that Barcelona trip where I felt really anxious as a reference. It was like completely the other end of the spectrum. I mean, when I lost our Airbnb key and we had to go and stay in a hotel, there was like £300 sleeping for 4 hours in Cape Town. You can't be wandering around the streets in Cape Town looking for somewhere to stay at 4 o'clock in the morning as 7 very pissed up British people. So it was my fault. I was like, stick it on my card. Literally slept there for like 2.5 hours, and it set me back a fair whack on the very last night before we flew out, flying home with that feeling hanging. So it ended in complete dismay, but it's a funny story now to touch upon. But that was a pretty special trip. Yeah,
amazing. What's it like to go on safari then?
Incredible. You kind of run out of superlatives for being that close to an elephant, right? You just feel like Richard Attenborough. You feel like an explorer. Richard's his brother. I went to film school. I feel like Richard. So yeah, seeing those animals in the flesh, great. I mean, we were doing things like putting our head out the window, which is apparently a big no-no.
I can't think why.
Yeah, but you feel like you're driving through the wilderness and this road and these loose structures that punctuate the wilderness every 1,000 meters means that you're safe, and you're not. Like, some woman was apparently dragged out of a car by a cheetah.
Bloody hell.
And then there's me like catching the breeze in my hair like a fucking dog. So yeah, there's definitely, you learn your safari decorum before you go, so you don't end up on a Facebook page. I think there's Facebook pages dedicated to stupid people on safari, which I'm sure I qualified for big time. But absolutely incredible. It's the first time I've probably played golf and really, really enjoyed it as well. Okay. Yeah, I had like the perfect round of golf out there.
Oh, really?
Beat 2 people that golf all the time. I'm just like every 3-4 months maybe, probably not even that, and had glorious greens, smashing it down the fairway, down the middle, driving the golf buggy around and just basking in the 30-degree heat. Yeah, it's class.
Sounds like a dream. Let's keep it positive then, before we go and find the negative aspects of travel.
Love it.
Where is a place that you could always get back to?
Lake Tahoe in California. That was a bit, being a lad from Leicester. So I don't know why the school I went to is now shut down as somewhere that takes year 10 and 11. I think it's a specialist sixth form college now. It was it was not a great school. It wasn't a bad school. And there's some really good teachers there, but it wasn't great. A little bit underfunded, served a lot of rough areas, but they put on, I think it's probably the teachers, because they got to go, unbelievable trip.
Yeah.
And it was like, we're going from Gufflaxton, South Wigston in Leicester, like the arse end of Leicester, to California. And when you take a bunch of kids from that environment over to California, it's just like, hold on. So there's a place that exists in the world where I can be skiing in a t-shirt and then an hour later I could theoretically be on a beach.
Amazing.
And that's when you think, why the fuck wasn't I raised here? Why did my mum and dad live here? Why don't they do everything they could have done to get out here? Like, the quality of life is unreal. Obviously, it's, you know, America is, the quality of life is great if you're middle class, or if you've got money. The social support, maybe it's changing, you know, not so great. But being in California and realizing that, like, some people, that's some people's lives. That they ski just for something to do at the weekend. You're like, what?
Ridiculous.
Yeah, proper ridiculous. So I could always, I haven't been there since I was 17, but I'd definitely like to go back.
Oh, don't blame you, mate. I could go there now.
Yeah.
So with travel, everyone talks about the positive aspects, and especially I kind of feel like that in COVID, when we think about travel, we think about all these amazing elements and all the things it brings us. But we all know that travel can be really shit sometimes as well. And there's some awful times that we've experienced traveling. Is there a place that you would never go back to because of an experience you've had?
You know what? I'm going to go with what comes to mind first. It's Dubai. Like, I don't get the big deal with Dubai. Yeah. People love it. And went there and it was soulless. It was to see my girlfriend's sister graduate. She worked for Fly Emirates. So admittedly, we didn't do the cultural stuff. If there was cultural stuff to do, went to Kite Beach, went to Soup Madinat, I think it was called, which was the coolest part. But yeah, it's like a country in the Middle East trying to, I don't know, build the most glamorous aspects of US and Western Europe, like in that state, right? And as such, like, nothing really felt authentic to me. And I was just thinking, like, people were clamoring to get out here, and I feel fortunate that I'm here, that I've got to witness it, sample the wares, but I would not spend the money it takes to get back out there, mate.
Yeah, no, I get that, mate. I do agree with you. And to finish us off, a bucket list. Do you have a bucket list, first of all? I've
in lockdown, the second lockdown, I think because I want to plan, you know, next year, I want to feel like there's going to be a sense of wonder and event next year. I've started to bank some places I want to go to in my head for sure.
Awesome. And what tops that list?
At the minute, it's still Brazil.
Okay. Awesome.
I'd like to tie in a trip to Argentina as well. You know, sample those steaks.
Yeah, they are the place for barbecue, aren't they?
Red meaty culture out there that appeals. And Japan. So that's probably those three at the minute.
Well, thank you, Chris, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. So many amazing stories. And thank you very much for taking the time to come on as well. I really appreciate it.
No, mate, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on.